welcome to another Advent calendar at ProAgile. And today I have Bjarte Bogsnes with me, chairman from Beyond Budgeting. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
I have followed you for quite a few years and Beyond Budgeting. It's really exciting. But for those of us who don't know Beyond Budgeting, could you describe this briefly, please?
Well, Beyond Budgeting is actually a somewhat misleading name because it is actually about business agility. The name business agility didn't exist when we were born many years ago. So it became Beyond Budgeting. But think about this as business agility. It is about, there are many similarities with Agile as such, but we were born at corporate level. How do you run an enterprise? Agile was born in software development initially. How do you improve development of software? But despite that, there are many similarities. It is about challenging the two main assumptions behind traditional management. The first one is that people can't be trusted, and the second is that the future is predictable. And we are heavily challenging both those two assumptions, and we are providing sound, effective, and tested alternative ways of running an organization based on very opposite assumptions.
Okay, thank you. I imagine that you had some problems initially before you came up with Beyond Budgeting. What problems did you experience?
Well, in a way, I think that many of the problems we saw and wanted to solve were similar or comparable to what the Agile community saw when they wanted to solve their problems. But again, the difference was that we were looking at enterprise level. How do you run an organization? From that perspective, some differences, but also many similarities with the problems that Agile wanted to solve back then.
I listened to you a few years ago talking about this, and I understand that quite a few organizations have adopted Beyond Budgeting. What benefits do they get out of Beyond Budgeting?
They are becoming more adaptive and more human. I think that is the essence of it. And that is not necessarily a goal in itself, but what it leads to is better performance, broadly defined. And I think it is an encouraging sign that very few who get started go back.
That sounds really great, actually.
It is scary when you get started, but once you're on the journey, you continue. And I think that is a sign that this is something that makes sense. This is something that works.
Yeah. And how does Beyond Budgeting look in an Agile transformation? What role does it play?
I think Beyond Budgeting is very much a missing piece in an Agile transformation, because I would argue that unless you address the things that we talk about in our management processes, which is about the purposes of budgeting, target setting, forecasting, resource allocation. We are talking about performance evaluation and rewards. We are talking about the rhythm of these processes. If that is left untouched in an Agile transformation, you will never succeed. It's impossible to succeed without radically looking at those processes as well. So we see that quite often we are called in late in an Agile transformation because the companies discover that there is something missing. And the other thing is that the message you are sending to the organization, if you do something radical with budgeting or with performance evaluation and rewards, the message is very strong, because then you are telling the organization that we are serious about change. Because I think there are two processes in companies that most people actually hate. and one is budgeting, and the other one is performance appraisals, right? So by addressing those, you are sending a very strong signal to the organization, and opposite if you are not doing it. So I would argue that it's impossible to achieve true enterprise agility without beyond budgeting, and we are about enterprise agility. So beyond budgeting can actually be two things. It can be a transformation on its own. I mean, we have companies who have gone through a beyond budgeting implementation, the full Monty, and for all practical purposes, it is an agile transformation. So beyond budgeting can be about transformation. But if there already is an agile transformation ongoing, or if an agile transformation is too scary, beyond budgeting can also be about improving finance processes linked to budgeting, and also HR processes linked to performance evaluation and rewards. That improvement will not necessarily give you any transformation, but it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing it if the alternative is doing nothing. So again, it can beyond budgeting can be about transforming, but also a more focused and limited improvement.
Okay, so this sounds like really beneficial things for our organization to embrace, but yet still quite big changes need to be made. Given your long experience, what would you say would be the reasonable first step towards this transformation?
Well, I think in any change, there has to be a case for change. And we always recommend companies to help their executives to understand the serious and systemic problems coming out of these processes. Of course, everybody complains. It takes too long time and assumptions quickly outdated. But these are just symptoms of a much deeper and more systemic problem. Because it's quite a paradox that here you have a process invented roughly 100 years ago. The inventor was James O. McKinsey. He invented budgeting, and his purpose was the best, actually, to help organizations perform better. And it probably worked 100 years ago, and maybe even 50 years ago. But today, this way of managing, this way of thinking is doing exactly the opposite. It has become more of a barrier than a support for getting out the best possible performance. And once executives understand that, well, the case for change suddenly gets bigger. Then we have a very tested and practical way to get started if the kind of full thing is too scary as the first step. It's about separating the three budget purposes of target setting, forecasting, and resource allocation. Because a budget is actually used for all three things at the same time, same process, same set of number. And that is a problem because it can't be the same number. An ambitious target can't be the same as a number, as an expected outcome forecast number. And if you want a good cost forecast, and you ask people about their best cost number for next year, but everybody knows that this is their best shot at getting, or only shot at getting access to resources for next year. And they know that, and they also remember that 20% cut last year. Well, that might do something with the level of numbers submitted. So by separating these three into three different processes, you can start to improve each one in ways impossible when it's all bundled. And once you have separated and start to improve, you are actually on a beyond budgeting journey, like target setting, what really motivates people, resource allocation, do we need detailed travel budgets if we say we trust people, and so on and so on. So I've been helping around 30 companies to get started over the years, and with the majority, this is where we started, separate the budget purposes.
Okay, that sounds really great, Bjarte. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation, and Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.